Hola, bienvenidos. Welcome to everyone to Don't Waste a Crisis featuring Taddy Hall. I'm Debbie Jaffe, the Managing Director of Endeavor Peru, the global nonprofit that focuses on supporting high-impact entrepreneurs on their journey to scaling. Taddy Hall is a longtime friend of Endeavor and, simply put, an innovation guru. Throughout the past 20 years, Taddy has worked actively as a mentor and senior advisor for Endeavor, helping our global network in over 30 countries of over 2,000 entrepreneurs. We are lucky to have Taddy here today because he actually has a day job. Taddy is a senior partner in the innovation practice at Lippincott, specializing in product development, innovation process improvement, and organizational transformation. Over the past 15 years, Taddy has collaborated with Harvard Business School professor and innovation authority Clayton N. Christensen on numerous advisory and research projects. Together, they co-authored multiple articles in the Harvard Business Review, along with a best-selling book on jobs theory and the science of customer choice, competing against luck. Prior to his current role, Taddy held leadership positions in innovation at the Cambridge Group and Nielsen. Taddy began his career with a venture capital firm, Advent International, working both in the US and Latin America. One of our board members has great things to say about Taddy from his time at Advent. Taddy es excelente. Before Taddy begins, I'd like to give a special thank you to our donor, Comunal, for making this event possible. And a bit of housekeeping. In order to best see Taddy and eventually the moderator, I encourage you to hide non-video participants in your Zoom settings. Also, we will be recording this webinar to share afterwards. I'd also like to invite all of you to enter any questions you have during the talk in the Q&A box, not the chat box in Zoom, and we will ask them to Taddy at the end of his presentation. Feel free to ask your questions in English or Spanish, and we'll translate them. Taddy, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Debbie, so much. And let me share my screen here and just say that as much as I wish that I were with you guys in person, it is great to be here virtually, and I hope everybody is staying safe and doing okay in this crazy time. What I want to do today is first make the case that crisis is an opportunity, and as the title slide here shows, and hopefully you can all see it, and technology is on our side, it's a wonderful opportunity for entrepreneurs. It's undoubtedly a scary opportunity because it's change that's affecting all of us, but it's a tremendous opportunity for us, and I think we have an advantage as entrepreneurs. Where I want to spend most of the time is giving us a way as business creators to think about the opportunity. And then second, much more practically, is, hold on a second, I'm getting a notification to turn off my camera. I think it is off. Yeah, it says it's off.
No, we'd like to invite you to turn it on if you'd like to, Taddy.
Oh, okay. Oh, she's saying turn it on. Okay, I'll turn it on.
I want to see your face too.
Oh, now it says the host has stopped it, so it's all your fault. It says unable to start the video because the host has stopped.
All right, we'll figure it out. Keep talking.
All right, all right. Well, technology will do its thing, and we'll carry on. Assuming I can see the screen. This is great. And so, you know, this is, Paloma has to stop sending me jokes, but what I really want to do is not only just to give us a way to think about opportunity, but actually help us identify those opportunities that we can actually prioritize and offer a specific set of tools that I use with my clients now, before the crisis, during the crisis. Actually just got off a call with a big financial institution that we're doing work right now, actually prioritize and execute on these opportunities. So the bulk of the times I said I want to is really should be spent on how can we make this practical and useful for all of you guys. This is not really a time for deep conceptual thinking. It's really about how do we get things done. Nobody's surprised at the magnitude of this impact. It truly is unprecedented, and I won't spend a lot of time on these figures because we're all living it. And down the lower right, you'll see some of the impacts here in Latin America in terms of the drop in GDP and the forecast is on unemployment. There's no question that there's just a tremendous amount of economic pain that's obviously going with the healthcare pain that people are suffering. And as serious as that is, and not to minimize that, it's not our topic for today. This is some research that we recently fielded globally, and this was just something I wanted to share with you guys. When we looked across a bunch of different countries, how consumers were responding to this question: do they feel more that I just want to get back to the lifestyle I had before the virus hit, or what's been happening in this period has really helped me reassess what truly matters to me, and much more towards the end of the spectrum of I don't see myself going back to kind of the way things were before. And what's particularly interesting, besides the fact that every country in which we ran the survey were leaning more towards the I'm reassessing what truly matters, but particularly in the developing markets, Mexico, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, India, all there at the top, even on the extreme of, the world's changing and I'm embracing this change and incorporating it into ways in my own life. Obviously, that case cascades down to all of us as entrepreneurs. We probably can see some of that in our own personal lives and the way that we're making changes. Some of them are imposed upon us, but some that we're actually feeling quite good about. And so again, what this speaks to is opportunity. And so this is really our topic: is how do we thrive amidst uncertainty and change? And again, going back to the title that we gave this session, it really does favor entrepreneurs. And the reason for that is we're not as attached to established capabilities, entrenched mindsets, and ways of doing things that are difficult to change. We're nimble, we're fast, we thrive on opportunities that maybe larger competitors can't act on. That's not me. That's an old Roman guy. But I've used this phrase before this pandemic, and I use it often, right? Because I believe it to be true. This is remarkable. This is just a little bit more of a fact base for how powerful the advantage and enduring the advantage is. And I think Debbie and the team are going to send this deck out, so I'm not going to spend time on the analysis. But what the Boost data shows on the left and the Gartner on the right is that a small number of this is obviously large companies, but the point translates to all of us. A small number of companies and leaders really do, as Virgil advised, take bold steps in crises, invest and grow. And what's particularly striking about the Gartner data is that these companies that invested during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, they sustained their advantage, not just for a couple of years, but to the present day. Never waste a crisis, and I think that's the way to take what's clearly a painful situation and turn it to our advantage. There's no question. If you listen to the mental health experts, one of the things they say is, hey, put a cap on how much news you consume, because you really can just lose your mind in all the noise out there. But what we believe before the crisis, and we believe more than ever, is that businesses thrive when they create new meaning in people's lives. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on our construct and our belief that innovation and brand, while often talked about as independent things, are actually tightly and inextricably linked. And where innovation and brand intersect is really this notion of meaning. The way that we like to define a brand, which is a word that lots of people use and very few people bother to define, but it's the source of meaning. It's the source of meaning that your organization, that each of our organizations, share with our stakeholders. Um, and when you think about innovation, what do we really do when we innovate, when we create new products and services? What we're doing is we're creating new meaning in customers' lives. And that really is the core of this intersection of innovation and brand. So I'll just talk a little bit about this language of brand and how we should think of ourselves as creators of meaning with our customers. These go-to brands, and I'll quantify this, and then are these brands, in other words, think of brands as this creator of meaning with our customers, that we seek out in our lives, and we open up and we feel heard by them. We believe that they enable valuable progress in our lives. They advance the world in ways that we care about, and they help us personally in ways that are meaningful and hard to replace. Again, I'll get off of the sort of the theory of this very quickly and get this down to practical steps. But brands that say and do. The keys to delivering these dimensions of progress and connection, the keys to achieving this go-to status, I should say, is to create experiences that generate both great progress in the lives of customers and also connection. And you really need to outperform financially. You need to deliver on both of these pillars. Progress, which is really a function of working like magic, resetting expectations for how things should work, and advancing my world. And what's interesting in the data and the research that we did, this notion of advancing my world is actually a much more powerful driver in terms of how your customers pursue the progress that you enable in their world. So it's not just about them, and it's not just about the functional aspects of the product or the service. It's how are you actually able to help them feel connected meaningfully to the things that really matter in our world. I'll give you some examples of that. Connection is not just about me and being true to me, but also this notion that, show you care. Don't just say things. You actually have to do things that powerfully demonstrate that you're acting with my interests in heart. This is where a lot of financial institutions fall down, right? They have ads and campaigns saying how they're on your side, but then on the other hand, we feel like we're getting hit with these fees that surprise us and other things, and so that's why so many financial institutions don't show up as go-to brands. I'm just going to talk about a couple of things that some brands are doing now, which bring these pillars of meaning to life. This notion of be true to me, which is such an important part of establishing connection. The way that Hyatt is partnering with Headspace, the meditation app, to provide their guests, who obviously less frequently now at the hotels, ways to stay connected and to relax in this time. State Farm, and this has been copied by other insurance companies, obviously realizing that people are driving less, has given back to their customers over $2 billion because there's fewer car accidents because people are driving less. That's doing, not just saying. That's really showing their customers that they care. Shopping is a stressful thing these days, restricted and controlled, and Costco was on the very front end of actually focusing not just on implementing, say, safety measures, but how do we make the shopping experience less stressful? And by thinking about stress rather than just logistics, they've created a highly, I don't want to say desirable, but bearable shopping experience in their stores. I have to say this is probably my favorite. Unilever and Dove have long had strong commitments to humanity, not just to customers. And they've run a powerful campaign and backed it up with action in terms of donations. But the campaign is really around featuring first responders and frontline healthcare workers with this campaign of, courage is beautiful. And it's gotten a lot of traction, a lot of social media pickup, and it really resonates with this people. So you want to think about, what does advance my world mean? How do I think about that practically? to me, this Dove campaign speaks to that perfectly. You know, it allows all of us to feel in some ways connected to a broader sense of humanity in ways that make us think obviously quite favorably about Dove. So that's just you may be wondering, like, wow, should I really think about myself as owning a brand or managing a brand? And what I want to tell you is you do. Because if customers are pulling you into their lives, either that's their personal, their professional lives, it's because you're bringing meaning into their lives. And so connection and progress are the keys to creating meaning, creating value with their customers. And when you do that, builds tremendous resilience, tremendous goodwill. I'll tell you a quick story because I can't help myself, but Southwest Airlines, some of you guys may know that in the United States, but it turns out they cancel the same number of flights and lose about the same number of suitcases as United does. But they receive 85% fewer complaints, which is pretty striking, right? So they offer a fairly similar kind of degree of failure, if you will, on canceling flights and losing bags, but they don't get the complaints for it. And that's because people have this forgiving attitude towards the brand, because the brand does so many other things for them that people find valuable. And this is just to quantify what I'm talking about, right? So these brands that do deliver on progress and connection for their customers grow dramatically faster than do their peers, and are substantially more profitable as well. So there's real value in terms of thinking about how you engage with customers through these two lenses and through these two vectors of how am I enabling valuable progress in their lives, and how am I creating deep connection by showing that I care with them. This is a question, and it's also just, I think it's interesting to look at some brands that we're probably all familiar with. But if you think about yourself and think about your business and how are you doing? Are you a go-to brand, one of these brands that people feel they really couldn't live without, that enable them to do things they just couldn't have done before? Again, not just functionally, because that's actually quite secondary, but are you advancing their world? Are you enabling progress in ways that they care about, that they wouldn't be able to achieve without you? And are you not just, say, like a Pepsi or Target, are you not just evoking nostalgia about a brand that you feel good about, but actually taking action and showing that you care in ways that matter to your customers? And so you'll see how I sort of named these different quadrants and mapped brands in different categories. Uber is a very interesting one, right? Because people say, well, do they help me, get from point A to point B? But very, very few people actually feel very connected to the brand. They don't feel that they, care particularly, or necessarily share their values. And so obviously there's an opportunity for both for Uber, but for other brands to enable that same experience, but to deliver it with more meaning and more connection. And where would your brand be today? So in some ways, that's the first lens I want to offer you guys. That's the first, I'd say, homework assignment or task would be to think about, how are we doing in terms of delivering progress? How are we doing in terms of creating connection? And through those lenses that we articulated, progress, a function of working like magic, and advancing my world, right? And advancing my world is actually more important than working like magic. And how are we creating true connection with our customers, right? Which is knowing them well, knowing their wants and needs before they even express them, and then showing you care with actions as well. How well are we doing along those two dimensions? And now, this is really where innovation and action intersects with that diagnosis or that thinking around brands. And some of you may have been familiar with the work that I've done over the last 20 years with the late Clay Christensen, who deeply, sadly, died earlier this year. And I miss him every day. But he and I and a group of colleagues developed this approach to innovation based on a ton of research that was largely done when I was at Nielsen, in a previous job, we had access to a tremendous amount of data, both about innovation failure as much as success. But what we were able to identify is what's really the causal mechanism of, this is very self-promotional, really the causal mechanism of innovation success. You know, it really isn't just a game of chance. It doesn't require, you know, luck or magic or genius. It does require a mindset shift from thinking about products and attributes of your product and the features and functionality of that product to thinking about a job to be done. In other words, what's the progress that I'm actually enabling in my customers, in my customer's life? How am I connecting with them emotionally and socially? Oh my God, the cat's come in. That's Maximo. Buzz off.
Classic. We're recording. We'll definitely share this.
Yeah. My 9-year-old. See, this is what happens when you work at home. Because you got to be agile, right? And that we'll just move right along. Maximo will do his thing. Is this mindset shift instead of thinking about product attributes or even about customer characteristics, because those are typically the way we think about how we identify opportunity, attributes of our offering, the technology we might have, the features and functionality of that offering, as well as our customer and their characteristics, you know, large company, small company, the particular industry. And what we actually need to immerse ourselves into is the circumstance in which that customer is trying to make progress. Right back to this go-to brands lens. How are they trying to make progress in their personal or professional lives? And I'll go quickly through this because I want to get to the current crisis and how we take these sets of go-to brands and jobs to be done and integrate them into actionable strategies that you guys can. This is just a simple example. We were working for a bank client a number of years ago. A colleague of mine got into a fender bender, needed some money, and we thought, well, what would the bank do? The bank would say, hey, you know, you need $500, use your credit card. Maybe, you know, we could give you a small loan or an advance. But she thought of all these different ways that she actually might come up with $500, right? And of course, the bank never thinks of, you know, eBay or Airbnb or Trim as competitors. But in the context of this particular job, those were all competitors to using her credit card. And she actually, you know, ended up using Venmo, which she borrowed money from a friend. But that's the way that jobs to be done lens switches and shifts the way that we actually think about opportunity and competition. Right? It's much less about our product, say the terms of the credit card, and much more about this particular person in their circumstance trying to come up with, you know, $500 for a car repair. I like to be careful about defining the terms that I use. A job is the progress that an individual seeks in a given circumstance. And again, this is independent of whether it's a business context or a personal context. Companies actually don't buy stuff. People buy stuff. So even if you're selling to a company, there's people in that company who you sell to. And you need to understand the basis at which they're making their decisions, not just their decision criteria, but what are they actually trying to accomplish in their lives. And we can unpack those. We can unpack those circumstances and struggle, not only in terms of what they functionally trying to accomplish, you know, whether that's have a breakfast or acquire a mortgage so I can buy a house, but how are they feeling in that moment? What are they really trying to do? Whether that's bond with their spouse or with their kids, or actually enable their family to move into a house of their dreams, right? Those are the things that we want to be able to explore as we think about the world through this lens, not of products, but of jobs to be done, and all these dimensions, the deeply social and emotional dimensions of progress, not simply the functional ones. Very briefly, I'll just tell one story on this, because Scott Cook, who was the founder of Intuit and a wonderful friend and colleague for many, many years, but he likes to tell the story of one of their first great successes, which was QuickBooks, which was a software program that's now being sold to small businesses. But initially, the product was developed and launched for just, you know, regular folks like me to keep track of my cash and my checkbook and balance my personal finances. And what they found over time is that people were actually using it at work. And Scott and his team were kind of dismissive of this, like thinking, well, people are just doing personal finance on company time. But when they took their time to actually understand what's going on, they realized that small business entrepreneurs are actually using this package to manage their finances in their small businesses. And when Scott and his team started talking to these entrepreneurs, what they heard was like, oh my gosh, I've tried to use, business accounting software, and it just scares the crap out of me. I don't understand the language that this is written in. It's all kind of financial jargon. And listen, I don't want to be an expert in finance. I just want to focus on running my business and not have to worry about running out of cash. And this simple little tool that you built is just what I need. And Scott and his team relaunched the product as QuickBooks. And as Scott likes to say, it had half the functionality of the traditional small business accounting and finance packages, half the functionality, and they sold it twice the price, and it dominated the market. But that's the power of shifting from a product mindset to a jobs mindset. And this is a point I always like to make, is the data that Scott needed was actually in that story, that messy narrative structure of a small business owner, stressed out, anxious about running out of cash, but just trying to build their business. And he needed that data, not spreadsheet analysis of satisfaction amongst customers and that type of information. Stories really are the raw data that we need as innovators, so that we can understand how it is that individual people weigh options, make trade-offs, and ultimately make progress in their lives. Successful innovators are overwhelmingly great storytellers. And this is just, sorry, I can never resist telling. This is Jim Kiltz, and he was the CEO of Gillette and a client of ours, and actually helped on the book as well. But he loved to tell this story about how they had one of the world's best battery brands and best oral care brands, but they missed the opportunity of, as Jim said, how come we never thought of putting the battery in the toothbrush? And it's because they had a battery business and an oral care business, and they were essentially optimizing for each of those. And rather than thinking about the circumstance, and people were actually getting frustrated, getting annoyed, having kids that didn't spend 20 seconds brushing their teeth, and it was some entrepreneur in Ohio who actually figured this out. And so to me, that's a great illustration of how we as entrepreneurs have an advantage, because we don't have these ossified business structures that force us to kind of live and operate within these swim lanes just because that's the way we've always done it. A couple final points here, and hopefully this comes through. When we flip our mindset from thinking about products to thinking about customers' jobs to be done, what we realize is that all products are pulled by customers into their business lives or their personal lives to enable them to make progress. And when we see our products actually as services that enable this progress, we get much closer to the way that our customers actually experience our products in their lives. And so I encourage everyone, think of your product as a service, and think about what is the progress that my product or service is enabling. We never innovate into a vacuum. Some behavior needs to get fired. Some product needs to get fired. When we're creating new products or new features or new benefits, we should always think about like what behavior or what other activity is going to get fired when we get hired. I'm always surprised how few executives of companies, small and large, are so focused on the magnetism of their own offering that they don't actually spend enough time on the decision criteria by which the current behavior, even if that's non-consumption, will get fired. Once you understand the basis by which individuals weigh options, make trade-offs, and make progress, the dimensions of experience that you need to innovate around get much, much, much clearer. In other words, jobs-based innovation can be thought of as lean innovation because it dramatically removes waste and risk from the process. And as my example with the friend who got in the car accident showed, and thinking about banks and all the different ways that she might come up with $500, category boundaries wildly expand or disappear altogether because they're often not relevant the way that we think of them as in the lives and minds of our customers. So let's spend this last bit of time before we open this up to questions, really thinking about how do we apply these two constructs? How do we apply what we know to be true about go-to brands and the way that these outperforming brands enable both progress and connection in ways that create tremendous value and resilience for them, resilience for themselves, value for their customers? How do we think about that framework of go-to brands and what we know to be true about the meaning that they create in customers' lives? And then jobs to be done, which is really the tool set by which we both identify the opportunities in our customers' lives where they might be struggling, and therefore seeking options, products, services that can enable them to overcome those points of friction or anxiety. How can we put those two tool sets together to actually help us turn this crisis, and I don't want to sound mercenary about it, but how can we help be part of the solution by helping people who are struggling today, perhaps in ways that they haven't been struggled before? And here it captured just images of the way that different folks, and even in an individual building, might be experiencing this struggle. So one of the ways we think about this, fairly simply, is we've got a certain amount of sort of forced adaptation. I've got to work in a guest bedroom here where the cat comes in from time to time, and as you can see, and that doesn't happen at the office. I just as soon be able to go to the office and not have the cat wandering around and interrupting conversations with good people like you. Then there's things that we probably are more willing to adopt. Like, I sure don't miss the commute. I don't miss taking the train in New York City every day, and I enjoy the extra time. I enjoy the extra family time that I have. And this is, I think, this third bucket in some ways the most interesting, which is this whole basket of activities that we probably thought about many times before this crisis, but now with the crisis, suddenly those priorities are becoming elevated. So what's an example of that? There's a booming demand for online estate planning, right? So it doesn't mean people think they're going to die, but people are aware of, hey, there's disaster all around. Life seems risky and fragile. I know I should be putting a will together, some kind of an estate plan for when I die. And so those kinds of services have been booming. Paloma has always had an interest in cooking, but during this crisis, she started, taking cooking classes and doing more cooking, I have learned. So there's lots of things that we might have prioritized in our, or had as things we want to do, but this gives us an opportunity. This crisis sort of rejiggers everything in ways that give us an opportunity to elevate priorities that we might have not prioritized in the past. And again, there's innovation opportunities across this spectrum. So yeah, for example, I just had a client meeting. It would have been much easier to do that in person. The clients in New York. I would love to be able to be with you guys in Lima. We can't do those things. My 9-year-old has a birthday next week. We're not gonna be able to have a birthday party, so we're gonna have to do something live. There's all kinds of forced adaptations that we aren't particularly enjoying. At the same time, those forced adaptations are compelling us to try things that might they might stick. Whether that's food delivery and takeout options, whether it's cooking more as a family. It's interesting how many people, 88% of consumers, expect the connections that they have formed online during this time actually to persist. And so I do think there's, even though some of the behaviors have been forced on us will go away, there's others that have been forced on us that we might actually be willing to keep. And I think this is in some ways more interesting, is this willing adoption. Hey, I used to work out at a gym. Now I'm working out at home. I can't tell how many friends have bought these, Peloton bikes or other at-home workout systems that have some interactivity to it and have a strong social element to it. So that while it's virtual, they're also interacting with instructors and with friends who share that platform. And it's enabling, I think, a really effective form of integrating being remote, but also staying connected, right? So there's a lot of new behaviors that are emerging by people willingly changing their behaviors in ways. Now, again, tremendous opportunity for us as entrepreneurs. This is one of the most obvious. I'm sitting at home, but what an opportunity this is, right? So 98% of workers would like to work remotely at least some of their time, but only 7%, and this is the US, offer that as a benefit. Well, that kind of a gap suggests there's some opportunity. What would it be? What are the opportunities to maybe make people want to go to work more? Or what are the innovation opportunities for firms to make them more comfortable allowing folks to work remotely, right? So there's no shortage of innovation opportunities that come from these kinds of contrasts or gaps, and they exist all across markets in all industries. And this is back to the example I used of online estate planning. There's these things that have been in the back of our heads for a long time, and suddenly you said, you know what? It's that I'm gonna do that more. Whether that's learning to cook, doing yoga, playing guitar, spending more time with family. There's priorities that we've elevated, and products and services, again, whether those are personal or professional context. I've been talking more about personal context, but I could talk a lot about professional context that have allowed us to do things. For example, some of the collaboration tools we've been using over the past couple of months have really been amazing, and I've been impressed by the number of meetings that have been better because of the different tools we've been able to use to collaborate in real time. This again underscores the point, these data captures here underscore the point of the ways in which people are changing their behaviors in ways that they expect to be enduring. And again, that speaks to the tremendous opportunity. So I really want to wrap up here, right, in terms of how can you use these tools. Go-to brands, almost like a self-assessment, and jobs to be done in terms of identifying opportunities. So these are essentially like 3 challenges, 3 tasks, 3 ways to think about. You can apply this content that we've talked about today. One is to think honestly and perhaps even interact with customers to find out, how are you doing in terms of both progress and connection with your customers? And where are the gaps, right? So where are there opportunities? If you're going to innovate on connection or along the progress dimension, as you think about how you create meaning, where is there more opportunity for you to move into that upper left quadrant of go-to brands? Upper right quadrant, I'm trying to do this backwards. And then second, as you think about this, the jobs to be done lens, through the lens of the crisis, like where are these opportunities for innovation and growth? What of these shifts that have emerged through the crisis? Where are there either current behaviors or desire for behaviors, like for example, working from home, that suggest innovation opportunity? And then more specifically, how to use the lenses and the tools of jobs to be done to identify those specific circumstances in which prospective customers are struggling. Where are they getting frustrated? Where are they getting stuck? Where are they having to do things that they don't want to do? Because those struggling moments, those are the weak signals of innovation opportunity. And jobs to be done will both allow us to identify what those opportunities look like, and will allow us to then construct those solutions that combine the optimal integration of dimensions of benefit to enable the desired experiences in those circumstances of struggle, right? But I think if you put these different steps together, my hope is that we can all find ways to take what is undoubtedly an awful situation and actually be part of the solution by bringing to market products and services that create new meaning in our customers' lives and create new growth for our businesses as well. Got to end with a little Marcel Proust, right? The real voyage of discovery is not in seeking new sights necessarily, but it's having new eyes and being able to see opportunities where other people perhaps miss them or don't even look for them. So I wish you all well. I wish you all health. I wish you success in your personal and your professional lives. I'd love to take some questions and open this up, but I hope that we all can make the most of this opportunity to thrive in a difficult time. Great. With that, I will stop sharing and pass it back to Debbie.
Thank you, Taddy. I'll now read some questions from the audience. Remember, you can enter any questions you have in the Q&A box. So our first question, actually, our first couple questions have to do with recommendations on tools for a lot of these assessments that you're asking. Michael asks, finding the jobs to be done requires thorough knowledge of your potential or actual customers. Given that this approach is more holistic, includes connection and emotions, how would you recommend discovering it in times of crisis? What tools would you recommend?
Yeah, the neat thing about, and I'm actually in the middle of 2 projects right now, is the way that we uncover or say get to these jobs based insights is typically, we've done all kinds of experimentation, is through in-depth one-on-one telephone-based interviews. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. I'm guessing there's some Catholics in the audience here. So you're familiar with the discipline of confession, and there's something about, I've never actually done confession because I'm not Catholic, but they have that screen, I've seen it in the movies, right, between the priest and the parishioner, and it creates a little bit of a sense of an anonymity, and the telephone kind of does the same thing. So we've actually found that doing telephone interviews, even before the crisis, was the most effective way to do that. And so what we do is, the way that we do that, obviously we develop a screener for who do we want to talk to, as well as discussion guide for what we want to talk to them about. The types of people that are most interesting to talk to are either what we call sort of super customers or super consumers who not only purchase a lot, but are also deeply engaged with a product or business. Those people are often fairly easy to find. The other folks who are useful to talk to are switchers, people either who have just started or just stopped using a product or service. And here's why these people are interesting, is that the essential raw material for innovation insights is energy for progress. If people have no energy for something different or better, or simply energy of a struggle or frustration, if there's no energy, there's really no opportunity. And so we found is talking to people who are either deeply engaged and say, wow, I can tell you why this brand is magical. I have a friend whose wife is a super consumer of scissors, right? We interviewed her and she's got like 30 pairs of scissors. I'm like, why do you need more than one? Scissors are scissors. And she's got like all these different jobs. And so if you wanted to innovate around scissors, you would learn nothing from talking to me, but you would learn a lot about talking to Eddie's wife, right? So super consumers and switchers are really valuable people to talk to. But long and short of it is these in-depth interviews over the phone. And the key is, and here's the key, it's 2 keys. One is think about your task as actually capturing a documentary view of a specific circumstance in which they're trying to make progress. Don't talk to them about like what they've generally done, what they might like to do, what they usually do. There's a whole bunch of reasons, but you really need to get a detailed story about something they've actually done. That leads to the second point, and then I'll be quiet, which is don't ask people about what they might want or what they might buy or what they might do. We're all well-intentioned, but highly unreliable in that regard. What people are very articulate and reliable about is talking about a recent struggle that they've had, a recent experience. And with the right questioning and interview techniques, you can uncover just an insane amount of detail and richness about those circumstances and capture these full-blown documentaries, which give you a lot of raw material then for thinking about where opportunity might lie.
Thanks, Taddy. That was great. And I think that the scissor woman is probably, we need to come out with scissors that could be converted into hair cutting scissors for all of us in these days. We're searching for the best scissors for that.
Yeah. We all cut our own hair. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a couple of questions around the elevator priorities. And Noah asks, you know, he loved the point about how some of these shifts will be enduring. In the midst of the crisis, how can you determine which new behaviors will truly last for years to come, like the shift to e-commerce versus returning to the clothes store? And I'd like to add to that, you can sort of predict things that once we return to normal might change. And we talked a little bit about home office and that kind of thing. So what is going to be lasting from what we've seen today, and what might be new things that we maybe haven't predicted today because it hasn't been an issue because we've been home?
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And so, you know, there's two things you can do here, but one way, I mean, again, you could use the jobs to be done technique to interview people about new behaviors. So this is super interesting. And we've actually been doing this is, I mentioned before that one of the activities that makes very, very rich interviewing and insight development is switching. Right? It means, you know, I used to go to the gym and now I work out in the basement, right? And so like that's just one example. And so you can interview people around those switching behaviors, and you can figure out, and this is actually interesting because my wife went to the gym and now works out in the basement. I used to go to the gym and now I work in the, I like working out in the basement better, right? And so if you interview the two of us, we have the same behavior, but very, very different experiences. And you'd actually learn something useful. She cannot wait to go back to Equinox. I got no interest. I've got the, you know, I've got the Peloton app, which I didn't used to have on my phone. I've got a spinning bike. It saves me a tremendous amount of time. And so you'd actually learn quite interesting things about both of us. And think if you were the gym owner, you know, you might want to talk to both of us. You'd think about, wow, are there things that I need to do to retain, you know, Taddy? So my point there is that there's so much forced switching going on that by interviewing people, you'll find folks who are whose stories suggest innovation opportunities in a variety of different dimensions based on if this is something that's been a positive or a negative experience for them. But switching is gold, and now there's lots of it.
Well, and I feel like we've never been in a moment, at least not in the last however many years, where there's been such a forced behavior. And so it is really a ripe time for any business to tap into that. Yeah, and get that data, get those questions, get insights from their current customers even.
Not to interrupt you, Debbie, but it's, you know, in the research world, it's been very commonly done for years, what's called, you know, deprivation studies, you know, where you know, you take someone who goes to Starbucks every day and you don't let them go to Starbucks, or you know, and you find out what they do. And that's like valuable research. And so in some ways we've been having like, you know, mass global deprivation research, you know? So anyhow, sorry, I cut you off.
No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to frame it that way. You talked about the different types of brands that have both the connection and the
progress. Yeah.
Progress. Thank you. Do you have an example of a brand that's gone from transactional to go-to during this crisis or in another moment? I think you should have.
Yeah, I don't have data on something that's happened like the real movement during the crisis. It's an interesting intellectual exercise to actually think about, are there brands that we might actually have thought of as being transactional? For example, like most quick serve restaurant brands are transactional. Many financial institutions are transactional. Are there actions that, you know, some of them have taken that might propel them, you know, up the diagonal by you know, both through the progress they've made and the connection they've been able to install. You know, one brand that has certainly migrated over time has been Samsung. I'm trying to think of global brands that people will know. but they were initially started as a very kind of low cost, low value manufacturer of components and wasn't even really a known brand. As they first really expanded into consumer products, they were valued for offering good products at a good price. So they were a very strong, what we call an enabling brand. They moved out from the lower left to the lower right, so transactional to what we call enabling. People found them useful, kind of the same way that people find Uber useful as a way to get from A to B, or Expedia useful as a way to book a flight. But, not much more than that. It's helpful to me. But over time, they've spent a lot more time investing in deeper understandings of how technology animates homes and brings families together, and how does technology actually play a role in our lives. In some ways, it's making me think of another brand we've actually done a lot of work with, which is, and I'm also trying to think of brands that people would be familiar with, is Walmart. And what's most notable about, we did a ton of work with Walmart because they were not in a great position, and they're doing much better now. I'm saying that with sort of a pre-crisis, they were doing very well. Is think about their old tagline used to be always low prices. Speaking like we sell cheap stuff. Come here, you'll get cheap stuff. And what the research showed was that, yep, they do. But what the research also showed is people not only disliked shopping at Walmart made people feel badly about themselves. They said, God, I must be a total failure if I have to shop at a place like this. And so long story short is we had to do a lot of work, and involved like kind of reinventing the fresh section of their produce section, changing the signage, changing light, changing the training of their staffs. But a part that was quite visible was their logo, their slogan changed from everyday low prices, or always low prices, to save money, live better. And the emphasis on all their communications then also shifted. So their ads and their communication could be much more empathetic, not just showing cheap prices and crowded shopping stores, but actually showing the way that Walmart was telling stories about ways that people were able to live better because of the way that Walmart was helping them save money. There's a bunch of other things involved there, but they made substantial investments in their stores and in their people and in their communications. And we also changed their logo to, I don't even remember, it used to be 2 words, a little star in the middle. Now it's 1 word, and there's a sunburst at the end. So it's a little happier. But all of that was part of a transformation that, and a set of commitments that did take them measurably up the axis towards go-to status.
Great, thank you for that example. On a lighter note, talking about deprivation, we've got some baseball fans in the audience, and someone wanted to give a shout out to your sweatshirt as a Boston fan.
Oh yeah, thank you.
I myself am a Yankees fan, so it really, I had to, it was a
big, get the full view.
Yeah, no. Sorry, we're in Latin America, not a lot of baseball, but I wanted to give a shout out to
thank you.
The comment.
Medias Rojas, yep. Yeah.
Our next question comes from Cesar. Do you have any recommendations when applying these techniques in an intrapreneur role as opposed to an entrepreneur role? So inside the corporation, I know a lot of your clients are corporations. So
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on, I guess, lots of questions on that. Like, how do you, what does that mean? You have internal clients? Are you trying to change internal processes? It still works, right? I mean, it still works in the sense of, and again, I'm trying to think about, there's different ways that intrapreneur could have meaning, whether that's essentially an internal change agent trying to change the capabilities and performance of a company's own processes, for example, or it could be an entrepreneur essentially that's incubating an idea to go outside. In the latter case, there's not much difference between the way you use these concepts and being an entrepreneur, except you have the additional challenge of figuring out how do you get sufficient separation from the mothership so you don't become inexorably sucked back into the incentive structure and the rewards mechanisms and leveraging the assets and capabilities of the mothership. Internally, yeah, I think there's a different set of questions that the one might answer. And if it's an intrapreneur, I guess the first thing I'd want to establish, if it's simply about optimization, you know, there's a big difference between operational improvement or continuous improvement from an operations standpoint and intrapreneurship, which is really about new business creation, new value creation. And if it is in that latter category of essentially creating new meaning, new ways of thinking and behaving, then I would think the tools would transfer very well. It's probably a wholly inadequate answer to the question, but I'd be happy to connect and see if I could be useful offline.
Thanks, Taddy. You mentioned some examples of B2C companies and their messages to consumers during the crisis. What about B2B? What's important to communicate and how?
Well, I mean, companies are struggling the same way that people are struggling, and so I don't want to be so glib as to say, well, it's the same thing. But I work very closely both with some of the biggest banks in the world. I work very closely with one of the biggest steel companies in the world, and you know, this particular steel company, their two largest industries that they sell into are automotive industry, which is basically shut down, and construction, which is not booming, right? And so one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on recently is how can we help our clients now, particularly in construction services, where they're often selling to, you know, smaller businesses, and we're actually the balance sheet that we have at the steel company allows us to think quite creatively about ways that we can support through financial terms some of our loyal but really smaller business customers in the construction services industry who are, you know, risking bankruptcy. So I think one lens is to think about how do I think about, you know, helping my customers at a time where they are under incredible duress. But I'm not sure that's going to be relevant to the person asking the question, because that's a big company helping smaller companies. One of the things we're also seeing is this is fairly public, but we do a lot of work with Medtronic, which is one of the largest manufacturers of medical devices and pacemakers and things like that. And one of the things that Medtronic is spending a lot of time doing is there's using an opportunity actually to kind of like unite them with their healthcare customers, supporting their healthcare customers, and also as a time to communicate with their workforce how the Medtronic's workforce is actually making a difference in the world through the work that they're doing to create life-saving products which are helping people in this time. In our financial services work, we're actually spending a lot of time on taking tools that we've often lumped together under financial wellness and think about financial wellness for consumers, and thinking about how do we take the same tool set that we typically think about helping struggling individuals, and are there ways that we could then think about financial wellness for small businesses because they're struggling as well. So I mean, I think the answer to the question is highly contextualized, but small businesses are suffering in monumental ways, and so then there's no lack of opportunity to think about how one might help them.
Actually, so let me just a quick question here. Do you have any book recommendations about startups on entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs to get more information?
Gosh, I don't know. I love our book. And so, I mean, I do think, you know, there are some classics. I mean, not all books are great, right? I mean, in fact, I'd say there's very, very few business books that I've really read and loved. Clay's first book, Innovator's Dilemma, there's a reason that Steve Jobs said it was the only business book that he owned, you know. but it really does establish the core theory of disruption and how disruption operates. And then in many ways, our book was sort of an answer or a continuation of that thinking, because disruption is really a theory for competitive response and how companies respond to competitive threats. And then jobs is really a theory for innovation, how to grow. Gosh, other ones. Most of the books that I find most valuable have nothing to do with business. And I find stories that are interesting. I'm reading a book right now. I think it's called The Company That Changed the World, and it's about the East India Company, which is like the first multinational that thrived for like 250 years and kind of pioneered this notion of how do you operate as a global company, in the 17th and 18th centuries. I just find that kind of stuff much more interesting and useful, frankly, more useful than, all these kind of like successful startup books. And there's books like kind of like Good to Great, which is interesting, but there's so many of those, and they're all, I don't want to be disparaging, but like tips and tricks books, and I think they're all great, and I'm not sure that they help that much either, so it's a terrible answer, but
well, I think you can't go wrong with the Christensen book.
That's right. How will you measure your life? How Will You Measure Your Life is probably his all-time best. I think if you want a great business book that's not a business book, that's a really, really good one.
Thank you. Listen, you've given us a lot of information, and Gabrielle asked, where should we start the change in our companies? You talked about innovation and product and tech, but also customer success, marketing, and others. Should we try to focus on a special area first, or maybe cross organization at once?
One of the things we often talk to clients about is purpose, and like why do we show up, like why do we exist, and it goes back to sort of a trick question that I often ask CEOs or senior executives, which is, hey, what business are you in? And inevitably you get an answer which essentially is a detailed description of their products and services. We make these stuff, or we offer these, and what I found time and time again is that's somewhere between interesting or not interesting, but it's rarely helpful. I can come back to sort of a funny Endeavor story, but as well, because honestly, I'll tell the Endeavor story maybe first. So, because the Endeavor story will answer the question. You don't believe me, but it will. Since you mentioned in your generous introduction, Debbie, I've worked as sort of with Endeavor as advisor since 1996 or 7, when Linda Rotenberg first came down to Chile, and I was living there and running a restaurant business and some other crazy stuff we had going there, and I was so stupid. I told her that Endeavor was a really bad idea, and like a good entrepreneur, she ignored me. But anyhow, I've been in Endeavor for so long, and one of the things I've done a lot of are these like sort of mentoring calls where I have an hour on the phone with some entrepreneur who's struggling and thriving, but trying to figure things out. And I always felt like such a fraud on those calls. I was like, I'd spend like 45 minutes of the hour just trying to like understand what business they were in. And so I did a sort of like self-research or self-analysis. I was like, well, what is it that happens at some point in a conversation where I finally get to like, oh, I get it, And what I actually found was I struggled to understand these businesses until they would tell me a story. If they told me a story about one of their customers or a prospective customer, and the circumstance in which that customer in their lives, in their businesses, was kind of getting stuck or getting frustrated, or reaching a dead end and have to create some kind of workaround. But if they could tell me a story about a customer, prospective customer struggling to make progress, and here's the kicker, it's a story without you in it, right? Like you and your product and service are not the stars. It's a story without you in it, that then you say, that story, I'm in the business of turning that sad, frustrating story into a positive story of progress, of confidence, of success rather than failure, of positive emotions and joy rather than stress or anxiety or a sense of failure, right? And so when a company can articulate that story, not about themselves, but about the people they're trying to help make progress, create meaning in their lives, that's where I would start the journey, is that understand that, know that. And that then gives you sort of an anchor to figure out, like, okay, you know, how does that give us energy to do more, to help more people, you know? So that's to me is where you start, is that clarity that comes from purpose as defined by a customer struggling to make progress, not purpose defined as this is the stuff that we make and sell.
Well, and so it seems like it can be a cross-organizational exercise. It's more, you start with defining that purpose, and it could just be a small team, or it could be cross-organizational.
Oh, yeah.
Marketing should probably participate in that, because all of the marketing that comes afterwards
Absolutely
has to be based on that mission.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Let's see how we're doing. I'm checking out the question list. Consumer attitudes are changing drastically. How do we know when is the right time to pivot? For how long should we stay loyal to our current business model? And so obviously we're in a time of crisis, and a lot of people are pivoting fast. Some are waiting to see how things play out. Any thoughts there?
Well, I can tell you, you know, what big companies always do is they wait till it's too late. You know, because what you don't have when it's kind of too late is you don't have time. You may still have cash because you may have a very profitable business, but it's much harder to change, you know, during a crisis. My steel company, for example, and this is actually a company that Clay featured in his first book, Innovator's Dilemma, was a mini mill steel company. And anybody who knows the story of the mini mills is that they use electric arc furnaces to melt down recycled scrap steel. And in the beginning, they could only make really crummy like rebars, and then they got into angles, bars, irons, and then finally into flat rolled steel. But the big integrated steel companies never bothered to, they never pivoted, right? They never decided to fight. It was always more profitable for them to focus higher and higher up market. And so I think, you know, the lenses that I would use to answer that question, one are the ones we've talked about right here, right? Like, where are there new and emerging opportunities that you're like, that's an opportunity. At the same time, you can say, you know, there's lots of businesses that have suffered. And the question is, like, is that business coming back, or do we need to adapt? Now, if you're the gym down the street, you know, you talk to my wife, you get one answer, you talk to me, you get a different answer. You actually need both of us, you know, to support your business model. So you either got to figure out, like, hey, you know, what do we need to do to make sure Taddy stays a member, or how do we attract more people who really value the experience we offer here? So, because it's not as simple as winning me back. It may be, and this is more of a, you know, kind of the pivot idea, is you look at firms that like, let's go back, like Charles Schwab was a stock brokerage firm, and they existed before the internet did. But they saw the internet coming, and they said, wow, this online trading is a lot cheaper and stuff. But they had the wisdom to create a separate business unit that commercialized the online trading, because they knew if they asked their retail brokerages, these guys sitting in their offices, to offer online trading, like, well, they're going to go bankrupt, you know? And what they found was that it actually helped them segment the market better, and that there were people who really just wanted access to high volumes of just inexpensive trading. And there was a whole other population that really valued the advice and the conversation and the personal care that a traditional broker would offer. And so I do think, you know, times of change are going to create both of these opportunities, right? There's going to be opportunities to create new growth businesses, and you may find that it helps you actually refocus your core on, hey, what is it that we really, really do well that that if we focus on that, could be valuable to even more people than we thought, because before we were, maybe doing an okay job for lots of people, and now we can do a great job, but for different populations. So that's not really sort of I don't think I answered that question in terms of advanced intelligence, but I think you need to be constantly conscious of new threats and new opportunities, and you don't want to miss either.
Great, thank you. You gave some good details about conducting phone interviews, and so you have a question from Lorenzo. Besides interviewing people as the primary source of information, what are some of the main secondary sources of info that you would suggest us to review in order to detect opportunities in the crisis?
So secondary, so non-research, in other words, like not other research techniques, but what's sort of available out there in the marketplace that you could just like, go consume, go consult. Certainly in times like right now, Clay had a sign in his office that I always loved, and he made it himself. He used to do what he called dumpster diving, and there was like a lumber yard, old-fashioned lumber yard on the way when he lived in Belmont, which is just outside of Cambridge, and the office, Harvard Business School, is in Boston, and he would pass by there once in a while. And anyhow, he made tables, he made furniture. He'd always be futzing around with stuff. But he made a sign in his office. I've got a picture of it somewhere, and it said, "Anomalies wanted." And so the way I think about the answer to that question is look for stuff that's surprising, and interesting. Innovation opportunity, it lives at the funky fringe, not at the smooth center, right? Averages, most people do this, like that's not really useful. What's really useful is finding some like outlying behavior, something unexpected that makes you say, hey, like, wait a minute. I'll give you an example. We worked with Kimberly-Clark, which many people know as like a Kleenex. They make Kleenex and they make diapers and, feminine hygiene products, and they're a paper company. And in any event, they also make adult incontinence products, which when you get to be my age become probably more and more relevant. But one of the things that we were able to see without doing any research is that more than half of people over 60 years old suffer from some kind of bladder control issues. And yet, most of those people don't even shop the category for several years of actually dealing with it. And so we didn't have to do any research. That was sort of out there, something we, found. People were always doing studies and things. And it was like that led us to ask this interesting question of, there's products out there, if you've got bladder, like, so why aren't they buying? It led to, and actually I've written a little case study on it. If anybody wants that, they can have it on the Kimberly-Clark, the Depends silhouette and Real Fit brief. In any event, it's a long story. It's a fascinating story. It's a great story. But the point is, there's all kinds of those, data points out there of like, well, why is it like these people having this and they're not buying the product? We did a similar work with Anheuser-Busch and helped them create a really not good tasting beer called Bud Light Lime, which people keep buying and drinking. I mean, it's $1 billion business on its own, but it was really came off the backs of realizing that like beer purchasing and consumption is 80% male. Like, well, if you think about these social occasions, and the other thing you'd find is like, if you go to parties, you'd find lots of women who'd have a beer and there'd be like one sip out of it at the end of the party. And so it's like, wow. So these women are feeling like sort of pressure to drink beer at these social occasions. They don't really want beer. Like, anyhow, Bud Light Lime came one of the big ideas was how do we.
It sounds like getting a piece of data that might be publicly available. Like,
that's right.
It's a big metric, and then now what can you do with that?
Yeah.
So sometimes it's the things that are very public, but it's the twist that you give to it that makes it the innovation.
That's right. And I'm going to say one more point on that. Isaac Asimov, who was a science fiction writer, he had this great expression, which hopefully this speaks to the questioner, which is, he said, the phrase that heralds innovation discovery isn't eureka, right? It's that's funny, right? And I totally agree with that. It's look for things that are surprising. Look for anomalies, whether that's in micro data or in big data, and something that just makes you say, hey, that's funny. I actually wrote a Harvard Business Review blog on that a while ago. But anyhow, that's what you want to look for. Look for anomalies, look for outliers, look for things that surprise you.
I'm on mute. Thank you, Taddy, for sharing your
insights. I can't hear Debbie.
Thanks for sharing your insights with you today. I'd like to highlight a couple of your statements earlier on in your presentation. I think really applies to this audience and our Endeavor network in particular. You said uncertainty favors the entrepreneur. They're nimble, fast, thrive on opportunities that larger actors and competitors cannot act on. So I really like that. And I want to highlight also, you said, don't just say things, but do things that show you care. And you gave some great examples. With that, I'd like to invite Oscar we're going to share a screen.
Great.
This with Oscar, can you?
See if technology will serve us again?
Yes. Via email, made possible by our generous donor, Comunal. And with that, we'd like to thank you again. You'll all receive this presentation and a link to the recording. And we all enjoyed listening to you and also.
Thank you so much.
Slides.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Endeavor. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.